The opening scene of Béla Tarr and Agnes Hranitsky's Sátántangó, though actually it's probably better to attribute it to four key artistic sources: this filmmaking pair, alongside co-scriptwriter and the novelist behind the text it was based on, László Krasznahorkai, and the film's composer, Mihaly Vig, who also has a story credit as well as starring in the film as Irus, the character the film revolves around. Even if his screen time is limited, though only limited when considering the scope of an almost 7.5 hour long film, he's still on screen for a long time. At this point, it's worth mentioning the importance of Gabor Medvedji, cinematographer, as the look of the film is so much of it, and to a great extent, all the performers as well. In fact, it is best to view Sátántangó as a collective effort, an important thematic grounding that shines through the movie, and the messages you can glean from it. But I've digressed so far already. It's too easy to do so of a film as dense as this, and just as long as this. To return, and returning is a motif throughout this film, pushing away and pulling back, a core structure of the tango after all, and this film is a tango, a devilish one, as it takes steps forwards and steps back throughout its duration, abiding by an internal rhythm that the viewer must coalesce with. The opening scene, though, is one of those brilliant moments that actually encapsulates the whole of the film. Tarr and Hranitsky and co. I'm reticent to reduce these films down to two people, especially not one, but for the sake of brevity, this abbreviation will have to continue, are no strangers to microcosmic filmmaking. To explain this, it is best to divide the filmography into two halves. A quick note, I will continue to define this as Béla Tarr's directorial filmography, though Agnes Hranitsky is a credited co-director on most of these films, and due to the often misleading nature of crediting, her input may spread further and deeper. However, for the sake of simplicity, I'll call it the Tarr filmography. The Tarr filmography falls into two camps. Part 1, social realism. This includes Family Nest, The Outsider, The Prefab People, and Autumn Almanac. Then there is Part 2, which I'm calling existential and poetic realism. This features Damnation, Sátántangó, Werkmeister Harmonies, The Man from London, and The Turin Horse. The style and thematic focus may shift, the philosophical drive changes also, but the idea of realism persists across both halves. This filmography, which I've watched all of, does divide very neatly. This essay will also reference his made-for-TV film Macbeth, a fascinating and I think brilliant adaptation of the Shakespeare play, brought down to 62 minutes and made up of merely 2 shots, one of which is 57 minutes long. Alas, this wider literary adaptation doesn't fit as cleanly into a filmography that is defined by contemporary or timeless portraits. Up until his 1988 film Damnation, his works are social portraits of Hungary, primarily focusing on working-class communities and the claustrophobic social situations they find themselves in, or that are forced upon them. These social portraits, by nature of being films that focus on the then-present, also chronicle the waning years of communism, which I use in quotes. The nature of the communist project in Hungary and the applicability of that word beyond political branding does not fall within the scope of this essay. The clear split, then, happens when Tarr's contemporary-focused films start to exist in a post-communist society. And interestingly, a stylistic divergence accompanies this temporal shift. Jacques Rancière, French philosopher, published an essay on Béla Tarr's films called Béla Tarr, The Time After. You should read it, it's excellent. In it, he points out this divergence, though it is an evident one. He also brings this divergence to his central thesis of The Time After, which he applies both literally and metaphorically. Tarr, Hranitsky and co. are chronicling a literal time after, contemporary artists reacting to grand political change, art existing as a mirror. But they are also preoccupied with the philosophical idea of the time after. Here Rancière points out how the filmography often repeats one narrative. This is not meant as a criticism. These are films that are light in traditional narrative, using often simple conceits as a catalyst for filmmaking that's about so much more than telling a story. This last point is what Rancière is getting at. This time after is a time after stories, or histoire, a polysemic word he uses that the translator Eric Baranek brings attention to in the English version of the text. This word refers to both histories and stories, overlapping them and pointing out how history, as we are told it, exists as a wider cultural story. These films, though, take place after these grand events. They take place beyond the realm of simple narrativization. In doing so, and to paraphrase very heavily, Rancière notes that the films start to reflect a jaded present that exists after the myths of progress and utopia have faded away. This is more true of the second half of the filmography, where the filmmaking, even in terms of technique, becomes more existential and open. Autumn Almanac marks a bridging point. It is a final colour film, with Macbeth and The Outsider also being in colour, but Autumn Almanac distinctly uses colour, expressionistically so, in an almost plastic theatre mode, in keeping with the theatricality of the wider film. Here, the focus is on what comes after this bridge, but specifically on Sátántangó, though this early period of social realism is where the films are most evidently microcosmic. Groups of people kept in isolated conditions that interact with each other in dramatic ways evidently serves as an allegory for wider society. The literal conditions they live in being a realist expose, but also serving as a microcosm for the country's wider conditions. So, after having stepped back to contextualise, let's take some tango steps forward to the opening scene of Sátántangó. It's an 8-minute tracking shot that is functionally divorced from the rest of the film. It serves no narrative purpose and, on the surface, has a purely geographical function. If we are to read the structure of Sátántangó by applying the expectations of traditional narrative cinema, that it is that format but elongated, think of this 8 minutes as the equivalent of a singular establishing shot in a more conventional film. This shot takes us through the village where the majority of the film will be set. Already we have a wider sense of space than in the social realist works of the Tar filmography, and this tour through the environment allows us to better pass the action that will take place within these boundaries. It is an intelligent move and quite theatrical. Here is our set, take it in, and then the action will take place. Think of it like when large novels set in distinct worlds for the need to include a map as reference for a better way of understanding the text. It is also very much a thematic move, though. We start with this landscape devoid of humanity. The village is just buildings, empty shapes, human constructions imposed onto a passive and seemingly hostile landscape. An important point about Sátántangó to note is that the village where it is mostly set is cut off from wider civilization for many months of the year, autumn through winter. Due to the road being impassable from the mud churned up by persistent rain, this will become snow, and that will be its own issue. Empty, isolated communities will be a film-long motif. This is a place where people don't seem to live, but in which they exist. That, by itself, a potent idea to explore. This shot, then, is part of one of the film's key ideas, a world, nay, a reality, that overwhelms us. Existence is a sublime object and humanity is not the centre of it. It exists impassively, additionally to us, not as an extension of us. The scene is not just landscape, though. It is a shot of cows just moving through the buildings. They just move, they just exist. This links back to the external reality of nature, but also is a vital opening metaphor, a shot that actually summarises the rest of the film. This entire film is about people wandering around this village or wider areas, existing in it aimlessly and hopelessly. We ascribe more meaning to their movements, but they have as much eventual narrative drive as these cows moving around. This is just a people. This is just a village where people exist, where lives overlap, and that is that. Interestingly, this visual metaphor is repeated and iterated on later. Much further in the film, we have another establishing shot, though not for a location we'll spend much time in. We see a grand square, the imposing and undeniably impressive architecture denoting traditional ideas of civility in the way the design of the original village does not. It's a harsh juxtaposition, but it's similarly empty. The locale has changed, but we are still in purgatorial landscapes, still in liminal limbo. Once again, the second part of the Tar filmography is a chronicle of grand social change, but it is the chronicle of Rancière's time after, an illusion of change, a perpetually flat present. We go from the old-fashioned pastoral to an image of refined modernity, one that can be easily linked to the capitalist promise, not the communist one this time, but there is no discernible difference aside from stage design. This unity is further highlighted by the action that takes place in this scene. Out of nowhere, horses fill the square, running wildly and randomly. It is an echo of the film's start, a symbol of how little progress has been made, but an important thematic echoing. livestock moving around is a constant, and animalised loss of direction is a constant. There is a narrative function also. This point of the film lines up with the point in which the village's residents have actually left the village, convinced to take up residence in a manor house they've only heard of. It is an overt symbol of upward mobility, the capitalist promise. They also told it it's theirs through investment. Their money can make more money. They can aim it and make themselves successes. All you need to do is buy your land and the land will be made into capital. This is an idea we'll return to later. But, as the moment of the horses shows us, this wider locale is just a continuation of the same. Our arrival at the manor shows this further. It is empty and dilapidated, a place without hope. Things don't change. In this time after, there is a perpetual sameness, as each rung on the ladder is shown to be just another rung. This being the case, the horses shot functions as political commentary, or can be read as such, a symbolic lack of change, a political move forward that is nothing of the sort, and may actually be a reversion. This reckoning of the myth of progress is endemic to this film. We're reminded persistently that we do not live on a linear curve towards progress. Time doesn't move upwards. In this film, non-chronological storytelling embeds this logic. The scenes of Sátántangó overlap. Scenes you often see from one perspective return later from a different angle, or you realise, due to overlap, the moment you are currently watching actually took place earlier in a chronology. And thus you realise chronology doesn't matter. The only thing that ever exists is the present, and we all experience it at different times. This elasticity of time fascinates me. The way that time dilates around us, it speeds up and slows down. Thus, the film that is Sátántangó seems to map out how time is experienced. To quote David Byrne, some are living in the future, while others still exist in a past. Therefore, these distinct segments of animals overrunning demarcate the flatness of time and the lack of progress. This idea is especially interesting in a film which the majority of the visual content is people walking down linear roads. Tar and Hranitsky and their associated cinematographers often, but not always, Gabor Medvedji, have this signature shot. Of course, it's a long shot, a tracking shot, but the exact structure is a character walking forwards, but filmed from the front. They walk towards the camera and therefore the camera backs away. This combination of backwards and forwards movement is very interesting. It's not a clever stunt like the iconic dolly zoom in Jaws and Vertigo, of course, but it is still an interesting use of movement, accentuated by seemingly incongruous camera movement. It is used a lot in Tar's version of Macbeth, a fascinating adaptation that strips the text back to a focus on individual actors. After prologue sequences that take us up until Lady Macbeth receives Macbeth's letter about the prophecies that fall upon him, we are locked into Macbeth's castle, and actors exist in the foreground, usually in close-up. It's a real choice, as fundamental parts of the later play exist outside of the castle, absolutely vital scenes. However, Tar presumes, for good reason, our pre-existing knowledge of the play, the Macbeth script or familiarity with a faithful adaptation functioning as a piece of necessary paratext. We are claustrophobically stuck with Macbeth, or with Lady Macbeth, the camera swapping perspectives like a baton pass in a relay. But then those characters suddenly appear out of nowhere. It is constricting and paranoid. It is madness-inducing. It's perfect for the play's main character arc, mapping his emotional arc through technique. Yes, key events happen elsewhere that undermine Macbeth's power and authority. That's the plot of the play. Here we only learn of them as Macbeth does. Dramatic irony is lost in the text, but becomes external to it. We experience revelations with the character, and a loss of agency and loss of control is made so much more clear. This is matched by cinematic objectivity, something that Sátántangó also employs. Tar and Hranitsky and co. place the camera in their filmic worlds as impassive observers, a key visual motif. The clearest example of this being the openings of Sátántangó, Damnation, and The Man from London, which all, either right from the start or very soon into their duration, include characters staring out of windows whilst the cows are done, with the camera placed on the same side as these characters, often while something of more conventional import happens through the glass. This sense of visual remove is key to these films. We exist as witnesses, as observers. This is a reflection of a theme that primarily exists in the second half of the Tar filmography, the ambivalent and larger world that exists beyond our subjective lenses. This objectivity in Macbeth includes famous moments, the air-drawn dagger of the mind being absent, existing solely in a mind locked off from us, and Banquo's ghost not being shown, not even suggested to exist. We just see Macbeth staring into the camera and despairing, a confronting and fascinating use of the audience's existing gaze. But a lot of Tar's Macbeth utilises the walking towards but backing away shot. It inherently conveys momentum, propulsion, progression even. We are the fixed point, but we keep moving. This gives us no sight of destination and makes this an endless striving to an actual nothingness. The lack of endpoint makes the action actually seem Pyrrhic, a road to nowhere. Who'd have thought talking heads would come up so often in this Béla Tarr essay? The combined effect is even more interesting, though, when we consider the juxtaposition of action movement on screen and consider it as a temporal metaphor. Forwards movement is matched completely with backwards movement. Therefore, progression forwards is equalled by regression, an illusion of progress, a flattening of time. In Macbeth, this is used to show how the tragic hero's ascent is actually a descent, a brilliant visual metaphor that effortlessly captures a complex literary idea. In Sátántangó, it has the same effect, though it is used more sparingly, as this is a film of space and distance. To return to the animals, though, the scene with the horses is actually witnessed by characters in the scene, Iromaeus, Patrina, and Horgos, functionally are twisted shepherds who have led, by way of treachery, the metaphorical cows of the village to the promised utopia of the manor. Them seeing the animalised behaviour links the animals of a maintained underclass, one that the trio see themselves as separate from. It further establishes them as outsiders. Also, a line is said explaining the phenomenon. The horses have bolted from the slaughterhouse. If our horses are an echo of the cows, and the cows the people of the village, then we should continue this metaphor. The villagers' journey to the manor house is a bolting from the slaughterhouse. This makes sense after all. There was nothing in the village, a place of stagnation that will not persist. They worked as a farming collective, but collectivism is gone. This is a new political era. Leaving that area is leaving death. The arc, and alluded to but never actualised demise, of the Doctor's character, he who stays, is testament to this. These horses have fled the slaughterhouse but now exist as incongruous objects. They stand out ironically as unnatural in this built-up surrounding, in the same way that our villagers can move on from the village but will never coalesce with the wider society. It doesn't match them. In this point is also a thesis about freedom and rule, which I will lightly return to. In determined systems where there is always a hierarchy, freedom from one area doesn't mean actual freedom. Sátántangó returns to the motifs of circles and spider webs, which I'll expand on later. It even refers to itself as a circle, a later film chapter stating that the circle is closing, the inspiration for the title of this essay. It is best understood as a presentation of concentric circles, all closing around each other. Escaping the slaughterhouse leads us to another prison, to another constriction. The animal imagery, though, has some inherent importance and links into another motif of the Tar filmography. If we are to read the cows and horses as our characters, we should interrogate why they are animalised. The conclusions are many, the most overt one being them existing as objects of labour, and as a way of reflecting social status when placed within a hierarchical system. What was a collective, if it ever truly was? This line of inquiry does not fit within the purview of the film, nor this essay, though I'll go back to it a little bit later. What was a collective is now a social rung. These villagers, the original farmers, are now effectively the farmed in a wider societal structure. This idea of the animal used to reflect the human status recurs throughout the Tar filmography, belonging in the second period. Damnation returns to images of dogs drinking from puddles, a kind of desperate continuation of existing, scraping to get by. This mirrors the film's protagonist up until a striking point at the end that ties off this visual metaphor. He is in the mud, on all fours, literally barking in a wild dog's face. he is reduced to the animal, a major theme in Damnation. The Turin horse, which exists as a final filmic statement, uses a weather-beaten and downtrodden horse, the titular horse, to reflect the condition of the human characters. But it also serves as a metaphor for the toll that life and time takes on us. We carry burdens and are transformed into objects of labour. If life is a burden, then we bear it. We are animalised by it, made into life's labourers. Werckmeister Harmonies uses the animal but takes a different approach. The centre of the film is a sublime object, sublime in the sense of the romantic, capital R, concept, the one that echoes through the poetry of Shelley, Keats, Wordsworth. The plot of Werckmeister gravitates around the body of a whale that is transported into a town. To link back to Sátántangó and the horses, the incongruity of the inherently natural in the unnatural space is part of it, and a reflection on how the tools of humanity have denaturalised the wider world, or how our normality, which we would construe as what is natural, is divorced from the truth of the natural. In Werckmeister, the whale functions as a reminder of the sublimity of the natural, objects that exist beyond explanation or purpose. The whale is an object of cosmic mystery, linking to the film's very opening where we see the beauty of a solar system, well, Earth's part in the solar system, shown through a kind of dance, only for nobody to appreciate or care. So much exists that is so much larger than us. A key part of the Tar filmography is about reckoning with this, or, to be more exact, about recognising this. The presentation of the philosophically meaningless in a world desperate for meaning, the presentation of such confronts a central hubris of humanity, the need for the world to bend around us in an explainable, rational way. But we are focusing on Sátántangó and on the human as the animal. This leads me to 4 key conclusions. 1. This pairing highlights a loss of agency. Now, this reading is clear and is core to the wider film. Reading 2, the idea of existing in a wider world where we are one of many things and don't have superiority. I'll return to this. Reading 3, how everything is made into a resource by capitalistic social structures. We'll return to that as well. And reading number 4, which we'll touch on for now, the seeming need for a leader. Analyses of Sátántangó sometimes focus upon this. They focus on people as these wandering things in need of guidance, and therefore needing leadership. For me, this is, forgive me, simplistic. It does not reflect a need for governance. It reflects a forced state that tricks people into following, into submitting to control. This wandering, this aimlessness, is natural. The cows do it. It also doesn't have to be this way. The group existed collectively and could continue to do so. What does happen in the film is that the social order creates a vacuum. The move from a supposed collective society to a now individualistic focus sets the stage for the arrival of Irus and his gang. He is able to be a charlatan, a false prophet, and maybe the actual devil, or at least something Faustian. He has, after all, made a deal with the oppressive authorities in order to be allowed to invent himself as the messianic leader of this disparate ex-collective. Though his status as immoral is clear from the start. It is seeded in the fear of him through dialogue. People hear his coming and react violently against the news, and is also shown for an incredible scene of him and his Sancho Panza-style compatriot Petrina arriving, which has them walking down a road just being assaulted by wind. Debris swells around them. Their arrival, their introduction is hellish. This man is the devil. Therefore, this film is not about a need for governance. This film is about exposing invisible hands and encroaching capitalist logic. Sátántangó is about how, in a world of collective responsibility, we cannot give in to the individualistic. That is what leads to tragedy, a betrayal of community. As mentioned, Sátántangó takes on the tango structure, stepping in, stepping out. An external, unseen force controls everything. This sense for wider structure is part of the dialogue, though. And a recurring image, a key symbol, this is the spider's web. Throughout the film, a web is alluded to, this force that is tying all these events and people together. We see the web itself in the bar after the dance, threading the chaos together. These exist as strands of fate, as treacherous traps and universal connections. First of all, one should interpret them as a filmic metaphor, of the film being in conversation with its own form. In this film, as alluded to, everybody is subject to some wider system, one that they are perhaps not even cognizant of. Their fates are determined by a constrained and pre-established chronology, leading to a sense of hopelessness. To a great extent, this spider's web that binds them together is the object that is the film. These characters are forced into a filmic shape, and their fates, their arcs, are dependent on an external object, a script, and they are guided by external forces, filmmakers. The filmmakers therefore allude to reality as curated, as crafted, as opposed to just lived. This isn't only a meta device, though. It's part of the wider romanticist ideas that are core to the Tar filmography, the wider sublime thing that exists externally to us. The film Sátántangó exists as a sublime object, again, sublime the term, not the qualitative adjective. Its length gives it a kind of physical reality. It is a weighty thing, an overwhelming and daunting prospect. Therefore, the film that encompasses our characters is a manifestation of the sublime. The greater work they are part of but are towered over by. Our spiderweb connections draw our eyes to this point and establish the argument of the persistence of a majestic, wider world, where there may be some wider design or purpose we can never understand. This echoes through the whale and Werkmeister, the harsh brutality of the external world outside the house of the Turin horse, and is presented in a different way in the social realist phase of the Tar filmography. To use Autumn Almanac and Family Nest as examples, though the prefab people would fit in here, these films focus on interior spaces and a rejection of the exterior. A nice comparison point is J.G. Ballard's High Rise, made into a film by Ben Wheatley. In this novel, a high-rise block of flats becomes the total reality for its citizens. Its floors become social hierarchy, and the external world no longer matters. They could leave, but they don't. This is the limits of their reality. Autumn Almanac is the same here. We are only ever in this one house. The characters don't leave or escape it. It is reality. This is used to microcosmically present societal constriction. The Family Nest does the same. Its purposefully off-putting title reflecting how people get stuck in suffocating realities, both physically and metaphorically. Interestingly, Autumn Almanac employs a kind of paradoxical spatial logic. We are only ever inside, but the inside is large. It spreads larger than there is need, creating a sense of being both too large and too small. It is a false large space, an illusion of freedom. A larger cage is still a cage. This surface-level luxury of a large house is soon shown to be nothing of the sort. It becomes claustrophobic and messy, even if the rooms exist far into the background. But isn't Sátántangó the same as this? Yes, it is a wide open film, a film of long shots of extended locations. It has scope. But in all these places, the idea of the false large space permeates. The isolated village is, well, isolated, cut off from reality. It spreads out to the background in a false sense, impassable terrain existing as a backdrop to a constrained reality. So, the presentation of space continues to be paradoxical. In the same way, this is a 7 and a bit hour long film where not very much happens. This grandeur is nothing but a gilded cage. The world is larger than us. Our place in it is small. This is shown brilliantly in two key moments of the sublime in the film. 1, the mist. 2, the bell. In a hypnotic moment, mist seems to magically part and reveal architectural beauty, a marvel in the wood, but also a place of sadness from earlier. It is eerie, it is inexplicable, and seems to link into the magician's aura that Irenaeus gives off. But he undercuts the moment with a joke, commenting on their surprise. What? Have they never seen mist before? This moment will go forever unexplained. As it cannot be explained, everything around us moves in mysterious ways. Maybe there is design and purpose, maybe there isn't. This ineffability is core, is key. The bell is perhaps the film's finest sequence, that of the dance. It is built up to in one of the many long walking sequences, always travelling down the linear, but never arriving in a linear fashion. Almost at the very end of the film, our doctor character walks out to the tolling of the bell. It is an unexplainable phenomenon. There is a chapel, yes, 5 miles away, but he knows there is no bell. So where is the sound coming from? Ethereal phenomena must have answers. To seek this is to be human, but as we know, Tar, Hranitsky and co. will always withhold answers from us. So, the doctor goes to the chapel. We follow him. A thing I adore about these films is that we see process. We don't cut to the arrival, we see so much of the journey. It is about cinematic time, and it spends time to show time. The arrival is mysterious and stunning. He ascends into the chapel and we get a view of it, and in it, its sides marked by graffiti from who knows when. Graffiti is another marker of time, people enforcing a sense of permanence onto these surfaces, positing a forever I am here and flattening out the present. Graffiti marks are moments caught in time and therefore speak loudly of it, and ironically so. To explore this idea further, I recommend following the work of a PhD researcher, Emma Brining, who specifically focuses on graffiti and its status as marks in time. In the centre of the room is a man hammering away on this metallic cylinder. It's not a bell, not as you'd expect, but it rings out forever. He is ringing it like an alarm bell, and he is shouting. His shouting is subtitled, and then, after a while, isn't. It's supposed to function as noise, a repetitive noise. Same as the bell itself. He is shouting, "The Turks are coming." Why? No apparent reason. The text of the film doesn't address it. We came searching for answers. We find nothing but confusion. We find a man marking out time, hammering it out beat by beat, and surrounded by time's ephemera. It is a reminder that time forever flows forwards, and that we are moved by its rhythm. It is the beat that underscores the dance of life, a seemingly hopeless life without explanation, a devilish thing. If this is the case, then what is this rhythm of time and our dance through it, other than the devil's tango, or Satan's tango? But does it matter? When we push for answers, we find nothing other than despair. For we are small and time is large. Reality towers over us. And this is fine. We can live amongst the majesty of things. We can live with the tolling of the bell. We don't need to fathom it and solve it. These spiderweb connections link to us, but are not from us. They exist beyond us. There's still more to say about the web, though. Let's focus on how they function as societal commentary. The seemingly invisible ties that bind us. This is what makes us a greater whole, a collective. We are always collectively bound, even if we choose to live in opposition of this, and as mentioned, that is where things fall apart. But if these connections are spiderwebs, we must interrogate their actuality. Why web over any other thing? Well, this sets us up as caught, which links back to being caught in time, but also presents us as, well, petty, insignificant. The wider system ties us, but can leave us susceptible to those who seek power. The spider's web of people catches our cows, our villagers, but now they are flies. Irenaeus, of course, is the spider. The villagers are strung together with lies and then preyed upon. Power is asserted, and control is created. But this is a film of concentric circles, and Irenaeus is also bound by the web. He is a larger fly, or just a normal fly that is playing with perspective to trick those around him. We should always remember that Irenaeus is under the orders of others. He exists to carry out their will. He is a pawn of a wider force. But so are those in control of him, nameless officers that just exist as symbols of authority. The circles continue. Again, a lack of agency comes through, but it goes back to a central point about the collective, about how disunity facilitates power that allows us to be controlled. Another persistent message of Sátántangó is how, with this cultural shift, or shift in logical frameworks, all exists as a resource, or is boiled down to merely being that. Sátántangó tells a very common filmic story. There is an object of desire. People want it for themselves. A group falls apart. The object of desire here is money. It is the money accrued from a year's labour on the farm. To return to our cows at the start, it is worth noting that the money probably derived from them, in a way. It's also worth noting that they don't really return. They existed as cows to make produce. That produce was traded for money. Now money is all that exists. The cows dominated the village, now money does. The actual importance of the livestock replaced with what they now mean to these people. It is a capitalistic shift, a focus on capital. It's not about the item, it's about how the item can be pushed into alchemy. Everything is a source for gold. So what was collectivised has ended up as a capitalist object, just money. This now functions as a central symbol of greed. It was wanted for the sake of wanting, as it can fulfill capitalist desires. In this system, it apparently creates progress. Of course, it never does. The only thing created is greed and disappointment. The persistent logic is that the money can become more money, or that it can be more to them. Our first plot point is a decision for a small group of characters to run away with the money, abandoning the collective for individual advancement. This scheme is overheard, things complicate. It doesn't end up that way, but again, the idea is that money is transporting. It is a mode of social travel, it is a resource. But it is mostly a magnet for corruption. In fact, it seems to invent and facilitate corruption. The money is Irenaeus' aim. He cons the group out of it, and does so with the audience fully knowing what he is doing. The collective just want to believe. Irenaeus, of course, promises the manna, this utopian idea, perhaps reflecting the communist promise once again, setting up a self-sufficient community where they work together for better success. To foreground this idea, one could easily argue that the already clearly existent divisions in the group, before the money problem, show a failure of collectivism. I, however, wouldn't read it this way on both fronts. Let's do collectivism first. One has to remember that this is a village in isolation, and that isolation has led to its decay, a kind of social neglect that was never necessary. We know a state can intervene, but they only intervene as observers, as spies and voyeurs. Therefore it is a collective doomed to fail, one that cannot interface with a wider collective society. Isolation is the problem here, persistently so. Disunited people is the path to suffering. That is the continued message of the film, and it's a strong one. If there is a critique of regimes here, it is how the goals of certain political movements are myths, are propaganda, and how the established reality falls short, persistently. The criticism is not pointed at the ideas themselves, but how they are twisted and destroyed. Therefore, the migration to the manor is part of this. Fundamentally, the collective moves from farming village to a self-sustaining manor society. The function is ostensibly the same, it is just in a glamorous locale. They are tricked into trading up for a kind of nothing, the illusion of change and the flattened present. The move is rooted in capitalist rhetoric. Money is a passport to success, social mobility, anybody can make it. The reality shines a light on this rhetoric and how falsely it all rings. Once again, it's told filmically, as well as merely through narrative. The vast majority of the film is made up of people walking down roads, a constant liminality, always in a state of the journey, the destination obscured or illusory. The path to the manor is yet another Pyrrhic walking scene. We've seen so many of these pointless journeys, therefore an established cinematic grammar, and at this length you can start to set out your own rules that the audience will be able to follow. This cinematic grammar is already signposting failure. This is not the journey, this is one journey of many. It is all journeys. Again, that is all life seems to be. That is if we follow the myths and push towards explanation, discovery, and dreams of climbing the social hierarchy. Even the cows are a path, really. They existed as animals. They had or were given a purpose, but they're really just a path to money. The money replaced them. The manor replaces the village. It is all disposable. The paths between are all the same. Obviously, the people also become resources. Yes, they are the metaphorical cows and flies, but even on a micro level, they follow the logic of resources. The film is also interested in chronicling scarcity, something key to the early films of the Tatar filmography, especially The Outsider, which frames a narrative out of scarcity and precariousness. In The Village, the relationships are defined by forced scarcity. They are moulded by isolation. As uncomfortable as it sounds, and it truly does, the women of the community are made into a kind of feminine resource. This is an idea the film is critiquing, not endorsing, as we see how the men gravitate around specific figures, especially Mrs. Schmidt. She is defined as an object of attraction from beginning to end, at points even being groped by the men. This societal imbalance, a power dynamic, leads to this. The collective is, once again, a failed social experiment, not a true collective and never egalitarian. Patriarchal forces dominate, and those structures repeat through it. The usage of Mrs. Schmidt, whose name even defines her as a patriarchally owned object, purposely so, is in line with the pernicious male domination. She is a thing to have, she is a thing they are entitled to. She exists like the money, a passport to something, perhaps, but also a symbol of status. Primarily, a resource to use for a skewed sense of self-betterment, in the individualistic sense, not the moral. A skewed scarcity, created for a sense of isolation and a patriarchal structure. It sows a hierarchical and capitalistic logic amongst them, and thus the flaws of this group are not the flaws of collectivism. They are the flaws of life focused around resources, life focused around capital, of society as a transactional and individualistic endeavour. As mentioned, even Irenaeus is a resource. This point is imparted very deftly, equipping the character with an arc that includes a satisfying reveal of an actual reversal of power. Well, it's presented as a reversal, but it's actually a revelation of an always existing lack of power. After the windswept arrival, we get some scenes of Irenaeus in a very different setting than we have been used to. Hitherto, we've been in the village. Now we see Irenaeus and Petrina in a sterile corridor of power, some bureaucratic waiting room. There's a comedic conversation about clocks telling the wrong time, comedic because it introduces the portentous way in which Irenaeus speaks, presenting him as a joke object to the audience. We know he's a charlatan. He says vague things, and the subordinates he surrounds himself with label it as poetry. He's a brilliant character, and an interesting connection to the lead character of The Outsider. The lead there plays a musician. In Sátántangó, a musician plays the lead. The musician in The Outsider is a big fish in small ponds that loses their mystique. They work in small doses, but sustained contact with them drives away others, or pushes them against them. Irenaeus has just created circumstances that play into his favour. He gets by in vagueness and mystique. The time conversation serves a double purpose, reminding us of the ambiguity of the passing of time, an idea central to the film. What follows, though, is a comedic highlight of the film, a scene that can be from a Coen Brothers comedy. A man sits behind a desk, an authority figure, and he interviews the roguish pair about their past. The scene's very funny. The dialogue is sharp, and the balance of humour seems to be on the side of the pair. This charming pair put the interviewers in their place with countercultural attitudes. They don't conform, and the affected style of speech from Irenaeus specifically is the source of humour, not laughing at, but with. He here is the prototypical subversive figure, a charismatic and oddly charming and magnetic presence that will shake things up. However, right near the end of the film it is revealed, though not directly, what this all meant. This is not Irenaeus seizing power or evading authority. This is them ceding to authority and undertaking the role of a spy. When we return to the authorities, we return to just the authorities, and what they're doing is writing up Irenaeus' report, putting his name at the end but recrafting his words. Irenaeus was just a resource, and in the end, he was somewhat unnecessary. The report is completely changed, often due to Irenaeus' style of speech. This scene is a comedy scene, but the comedy is firmly positioned with Irenaeus as the target. We realise how little power he had, how he was always an object of mockery. His voice meant nothing. His personality meant nothing. He was one pawn of many pawns. Him being written out of the report, functionally, is a kind of character death, a point I'll return to. First of all, though, I have to say, not enough is said about how funny Sátántangó is. Sátántangó is a very funny movie, often darkly funny, but sometimes just very silly and frequently hysterically funny. Why the humour is of note in this essay is that the style of humour also makes it thematically important and ties back to our circular motif of repetitions. There are a few scenes in the film that exist as comic scenes, and these are almost always the comedy of repetition. Of repetition. Of repetition. Repeatedly rephrasing Irenaeus' crude prose is one of these. Another is a drunken character telling the same story about Irenaeus arriving at a pub. The first time he tells it, the joke is that we know the story is false. We saw the arrival, we have the objective view, to link back to an earlier point. This is what the camera does. And we know the story is telling does not meld with reality. That distance makes comedy. And then that character reoccurs and tells the story again. His insistence on a false narrative makes it funnier. The zenith of this is a scene where he repeats his story like a mantra. It underscores a lengthy scene as he cycles through maybe 3 sentences. It is this fantastic comedy of repetition, but it also becomes one of the markers of time. His telling of the story is the tolling of the bell, it's the wandering of the horses, it's the endless journeys on endless paths. There is an eternal rhythm to Sátántangó. It all speaks of infinite repetition, of time forever ticking on. The storytelling also brings up another key Tar and Hronitsky device, the evasion of the traditional shot reverse shot style for dialogue. Rather than cutting to speakers as they talk, we stick in places. Sometimes we stick to the speaker. One chapter is about Irenaeus making a speech, so a camera sticks so close to him that he dominates the frame. He speaks at us. The filmic setup is conveying his messianic posturing, his want for complete control, and his command over the available space. At other points, we rest on a character, Mrs. Schmidt. The men are droning on and we watch her impassive and judgmental face. We're allowed to read into it, and we learn more from her reaction or calculated impassivity than we do from the words. It's all just noise. Sátántangó reminds us of how much day-to-day interaction is just noise. This links back to a need to refocus, to live better. Another comedic repetition is in the dance scene, which I will expand on later. Mr. Schmidt just keeps walking backwards and forwards with a small baguette on his head. That's it. Occasionally people try to knock it off his head, but he just keeps doing it. The drunken stupidity of it, the meaninglessness of this action in this weighty philosophical film, that's where the humour comes from. But also the resonance. It is another ineffable moment, this time a celebration. It is a moment of human levity, of extended silliness. There's such joy in the sequence, warmth and humanity. It's how things could be. But it also exists in the scope of the larger external world. We know tragic things are happening at the same time. It's poignant and very true. Repetitions continue, life keeps hammering away, externality persists. The jokes in Sátántangó are very funny, but they aren't just jokes. They are core to the film, a form of cycles and repetitions. They push us back to the opening of Werkmaster harmonies, of the grand cosmic scale, of the grand cosmic joke in which we, sometimes, feel like the punchline. At this stage, we should consider the film's wider repetitions, ones that foreground this idea of the cosmic joke. Of course, the wider film is a repetition. Its end and beginning match up very cleanly, separated by livestock, but trap us in this suffocating structure of the tango. We move out, we move back, we loop. There's one rhythm, and it loops. This is core to the soundtrack as well, a sequence of sonically similar repetitions. 2 distinct repetitions come to mind though. The Doctor's journey. Early on, the Doctor runs out of Palinka. He doesn't leave his house. Food is brought to him. He persists in isolation, always drunk, living to take notes on those around him. The notes are one part of the repetition, as they diminish Irenaeus. Irenaeus takes notes of the people and gives them to the officers, and is then written out of those notes. The Doctor was doing this anyway. Irenaeus is no higher than this character, no more important, no functionally different. It is diminishing and equalising, a vital echo. The mirroring goes further though, as the Doctor is this reverse outsider figure, a skewed version of Irenaeus, a person of authority who makes a grand journey. Irenaeus re-enters the town after time away. The Doctor finally exits his house after time only spent there. Their journeys are motivated by greed, for power, or more alcohol. They are similarly pointless. The Doctor travels all this way only to collapse and be transported off in a truck. Maybe to hospital, maybe back to his house. It doesn't matter. This mirrors a wider arc in the film. The people of the village also leave their home. They go all the way to this manor and are then transported out in a truck of sorts by Irenaeus, dropped off in various locations, none of which matter. The people thought they were making progress, that they had left the Doctor behind, and they are just mimicking his pointless journey. Another pointless journey. the young girl and the Messiah. Another smart repetition is the story of the young girl, Estika. Now, this scene is a definitive flaw with the film. Its content is enough for anybody to reject the film outright because of the depiction of animal abuse. You can read around how it was filmed, claims being made about teaching a cat a game in which it knew how to respond to stimulus, and making it act out in this way. They also say a veterinarian was on set and that the cat did not die and was not hurt. The distress in the scene does look very real. Don't worry, we'll not use footage from it in the essay. The moment is symbolically important, but points out how literature can work in ways films cannot. Reading about this mode of torture, you can understand how it fits into a wider whole, why it matters. Actually having to enact it on screen in a film marked by realistic portrayals of process, that's very different. But the wider journey of Estika is a clever mirroring of Irenaeus, once again. Both characters have this uncanny essence. They are fascinating screen presences, shot in a way that makes them enigmatic and interesting. And both do the same thing, the fate of one being a symbolic explanation for the fate of the other. Estika is crafted by her surroundings. Her treatment is another indication of the falsity of this supposed collective. She is bullied, oppressed, perceived as being lesser. She is made powerless. But the cat trusts her. The cat stays with her. This creates a power dynamic which allows the filmmakers to show human cruelty and what happens in these hierarchical structures. Fundamentally, it shows how oppression breeds oppression. She abuses his cat because she can. She can assert control over it, whereas outside of this, she has no control. No ability to assert herself in a society defined by those who can rule over others. The result is emptiness, though. She is still mocked by those around her and ends up dying by suicide. This death becomes a resource. Everything is, after all. A way that Irenaeus is able to create support. A tragedy makes the collective feel guilt. Irenaeus gives them another way, a possibility of difference. He offers them a path out. They take it. A moment of emotive sadness becomes a catalyst for the Machiavellian gospel. Now the horses decide to leave the slaughterhouse. But this journey of Estika is also the journey of Irenaeus. He, ruled by the officers, asserts control over the village. At the end, when he has completed his supposed task, he gains nothing. All that he gets is symbolically killed, illuminated by the death of Estika. This fate pushes us to read him being written out of his own report as a kind of death. He gets no actual conclusion. He didn't actually matter. These characters seem so different, but their arcs are the same. The capital-driven society makes everything hierarchical and transactional. All this does is corrupt and destroy. It isn't all crushing sadness, though. As stated earlier, one moment brims with life. The dance. A core scene, one of the very best scenes of Sátántangó, is an extended shot of a dance. It just unfurls in front of the camera and is just enrapturing. It features the baguette balance and another great repetition gag where a character keeps chanting tango, 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 tango. A moment that makes me wish for an audience participation sing-along screening of Sátántangó. Please make it happen. Why the dance scene is so beautiful is that it goes back to the idea of life being everywhere. You let the camera run and humanity is evoked. It's quite poignant, strangely optimistic and hopeful. It returns to the watching from the window point, also an important thing to do. This is an important thing to re-evoke, as films should make us reflect on the act of viewing. Cinema is about watching, and Sátántangó and the wider works of the Tar filmography make us complicit in our own watching, aware of it at the very least. The dance scene, though, should be thought of like a painting in a gallery. It is best interpreted when viewed in this way. I was reminded of the work of the artist William Hogarth, especially Gin Lane, the darkly comic take on desolation and desperation, the focus on excess and alcohol intake, and the aesthetic match of the harsh blacks and whites. But also in that, every detail is a story idea. You can read wide lives and experiences into all parts of that image. It is fertile ground for an exploration of humanity. Oppression and unfairness shines through, as does surface-level joy. The dance scene does the same. It is another repetitive rhythm, that being the centre of the film, but it is just pure storytelling. It is the most narrative content in the film. It links to a scene in Damnation, an extended dance, but that section isn't as bold, it's not as strong. The character work isn't as established. The view-in isn't as perfect. the events aren't as potent. In this dance, the Sátántangó, we swap partners, we have micro-narratives, we learn so much about the humans and how they relate to each other. It is through watching, through observing, that we glean truths. That's why cinema works. It's another link back to a core message of Sátántangó, then, rather than chasing these ecstatic truths, holy mountains, and grand answers, we should revel in the humanity of it all. We learn the most from each other. This dance has the story of humanity in it, this collective action, not one of the long journeys. The beat hammers on through it, but it's a joyful one. A barman stands at the back, hammering on the bar. It's similar to a stilted moment in The Man from London, where a character repeatedly cuts meat, keeping a persistent beat. There it actually feels forced. The undercurrent of time feels pushed up, manufactured, as opposed to something that naturally evokes from humanity. It isn't quite the devil's tango, it is a stilted moment of theatricality that exists purely to produce an effect, rather than to reflect a reality. Why Sátántangó is brilliant is that its repetitions, its hammerings out of time and progression, they all feel natural. The film exists in a time signature and is propelled by it. In the end, Sátántangó is a film of circles, of concentric circles. They close in on each other and repeat infinitely, or at least seem to. But these structures are unnatural. They are forced units of oppression. In this film, the wider world exists in two ways, presenting a dichotomy. There are the socially constructed exteriors. These set the form of control and oppression. They exist around us and constrain. They are not objects of awe, but objects of pain and suffering. But there's also the wider world, the sublime wider world that extends far beyond us. The repetitions in the film are either natural or unnatural. The doctor goes to town and is sent away where it doesn't matter. The people go to the manor and are shipped off where it doesn't matter. Tricksters and charlatans are tricked. Oppression breeds oppression. And then there are rhythms rather than repetitions. There is the natural flow of time, the time signature that propels us, evoking from a greater power that may not have any real existence. That is not to say that this is all positive. This forever marching forward and forever stretching out reality is overwhelming. To a great extent, we are caught in crushing cycles. The long shots of the film evoke this seeming endlessness. We are also oppressed by the natural. The geography of the town makes it inaccessible. We are being conspired against. But it doesn't happen like this. The roads in this film function as arteries. They deliver everything and define so much of the action. They are these connections, which are used for isolation, when they should be used in a collective sense. Everything links to elsewhere, but we define things as journeys, as moving on, as leaving things behind. But it is wider society that has neglected this place. As said before, the state, the institutions could aid. People could come together. Instead, we focus on the individualistic. We close ourselves off. We live as complete circles. From the early Tar filmography, we can glean a politics. There is a deep interest in presenting the unfairness done to the working class, to the people left on a manufactured edge of an uncompassionate society. This is so clear in The Outsider, the prefab people. This point of people having to scrape by just to exist, it continues all the way through the Turin Horse. Life as pain is a seemingly nihilistic heart of all of these films. I don't read it that way, though. Tar has been lightly mocked for talking about his films as hopeful, in a way, as opposed to just crushing pessimism. But I agree with him. These films hold up mirrors to humanity and society and glean poetry along the way. They present isolation and cruelty and inhumanity, but inhumanity implies an existing humanity. The worlds of these films are hopeless, but they are so as to enact sparks of compassion in the viewer. Unlike weaker films that gesture towards politics, these films don't do our compassion for us. They don't tie a bow around suffering and neatly create an alternative that doesn't actually exist. These aren't escapist fantasies, and that is why many won't want them and frankly don't need them. But the lack of tight arcs that satisfy or mollify audiences is so important. This isn't... The worlds presented in this film, and these films, aren't inevitable. They're not the way things have to be. But they are the worlds we live in to a great extent. The harsh truths here encourage our intervention. They encourage us to live differently. Sátántangó specifically mentions that the circle closes, which means that at a point these circles are laid open. We don't have to be closed off. The failures of a false collectivism planted the seeds for pernicious and exploitative capitalism. But neither of these are human nature. Humanity exists in the dance. Humanity exists in the small moments. Cycles close around us, but we can disrupt these. We can break these cycles. In closing the circle on Tara and Sátántangó, I encourage you to approach life with openness, to invade an individualism that never gleans actor rewards. Sometimes we need to wallow in the tar pits, to see how dark things get, can be or are, to realise that this is only one way. To realise that there is a need to craft out something else. So yes, in the end, Sátántangó is hopeful. It resonates hope, even if it doesn't contain it. Just wanted to put a quick note at the end. First of all, to thank you so much for watching. And secondly, to do a bit of a plug. We have a Patreon that we'd love if you would support, especially if you like this video. We'd love to do more stuff like this as in-depth and long form, but it's hard to do it on our schedules and with what we have. Therefore, any help and support is greatly appreciated. If you like what we do, you'd like us to do more, and like to keep in touch in general and follow us over the Stacks, then please visit patreon.com/thestacksonfilm, where you can throw us a bit, support us, and hopefully we can do more stuff like this in the future. Thank you again so much for watching.